I looked my daughter right in the eyes across the dinner table, and I let my hands shake on purpose. I told her the logistics company was gone. I said the insurance settlement had fallen through, that the lawsuit had eaten every dollar I had left, and that I was going to have to sell the house on Route 9 just to keep the lights on. I waited for her to reach for my hand. I waited for her to tell me we'd figure it out together, the way family does. Instead, I watched something flicker behind her eyes that I hadn't seen before, not sadness, not worry, but a kind of quiet, satisfied calculation. She set down her fork very carefully, and she said, "Well, about time something in this family went right for once." What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that my $38 million was sitting exactly where I'd left it, locked in a trust her fancy lawyer husband had never once been able to find. The breakdown at that table wasn't a breakdown, it was a test. It was the most painful test I have ever had to run in my life, because it meant looking my only daughter in the face and asking her, silently, whether she still loved the man who raised her or only the money he might one day leave behind. And the very next morning, I got my answer, and it was so much worse than I ever let myself imagine. I was in the mudroom off the kitchen, half hidden behind the coats, when I heard her out on the back deck on the phone. She wasn't talking to a friend. She was talking to a man named Griffin Pace about a $9 million offer on my land, the 40 acres my father cleared with a mule team back in 1958. And she was already discussing how fast they could get me, declared unfit to sign anything, so nobody would ever ask me a single question about it. But here's the part that made my knees go weak against that door frame. The shadow buyer, the anonymous man Griffin Pace kept referring to, the mystery investor who'd apparently made a full-price cash offer with no contingencies, that was me. I'd made the offer myself, through a company she'd never heard of, 3 weeks earlier, just to see who would come sniffing around my own front door. My name is Walter Doss. I'm 67 years old, and I live on the same 40 acres outside Millbrook, Ohio, that my father worked until the day he dropped dead in the north field with his boots still laced. I didn't inherit money. I inherited debt, a broken tractor, and a stubbornness that my late wife Ellen used to say could crack granite. I built Doss Freight Solutions out of one truck and a phone line in a feed store, and by the time I sold my controlling stake 4 years ago, I had 1,100 trucks running under my name across 6 states. Nobody who meets me now would ever guess it. I wear the same brand of work boots I wore in 1985. I drive a 15-year-old pickup with a cracked windshield I keep meaning to fix. Ellen used to laugh at me for it. She'd say, "Walter, you could buy this whole town, and you dress like you're borrowing it." She passed 4 winters ago, on a Tuesday in February, and the house has never once stopped feeling like it's holding its breath, waiting for her to come back down the stairs. My daughter's name is Renata. She's 39, sharp as a tack, went to law school on my dime, and married a man named Griffin Pace, who practices what he calls asset structuring, which as far as I can tell means finding creative ways to move other people's money into his own pocket, without technically breaking a law. I liked Griffin fine at the wedding. I liked him less every year after that. There's a particular kind of smile some men have, a smile that only shows up when they think they've found an angle nobody else has spotted, and I started seeing that smile on Griffin's face more and more often whenever the subject of my health, or my will, or your long-term plans, Walter, came up at Thanksgiving. It started small, the way these things always do. A doctor's appointment Renata insisted on driving me to, even though I've driven myself to every appointment I've had since Eisenhower was president. A comment about how foggy I'd seemed lately, said in front of my neighbor Pete Kowalski at the hardware store, loud enough for Pete to hear, quiet enough that I couldn't quite call it an accusation. A folder of papers Griffin left by accident on my kitchen counter, thick with language about durable power of attorney and something called a revocable living trust that, if I'd signed it, would have handed every decision about my land, my money, and my own body to my son-in-law inside of 90 days. I didn't sign it. I didn't say a word about finding it either. I just started paying attention the way I used to pay attention when a driver's logbook didn't quite add up, or a warehouse invoice was 6 cents off in a way that told you somebody thought you were too old and too tired to check the math. I hired a man named Curtis Boone, a private investigator who used to work fraud cases for the state attorney general's office before he went independent, and I told him one thing: find out what my daughter and her husband are actually planning, and find out before they find out I'm looking. What Curtis brought back to me 2 weeks later made me sit down hard in my own kitchen chair. Griffin Pace was $2.6 million in debt to a private lending group out of Cleveland that did not, according to Curtis, operate the way a bank operates. They didn't send letters. They sent men. Griffin had borrowed against the promise of an inheritance he did not yet have, betting that his father-in-law's failing health that was, as far as I could tell, sitting right there in my own boots on my own land, completely fine, would resolve itself in his favor before the debt came due. He needed my property, needed it sold and the money in his hands, inside of 4 months, or the kind of men who didn't send letters were going to start showing up at his office instead of mine. So I gave them exactly what they were looking for. I told Renata the business was gone. I sat across from her and Griffin at that dinner, and I watched the two of them try so hard and fail so completely to hide their relief. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life, and I have buried a wife and both of my parents, so I know something about hard days. Renata started coming by to check on me 3-4 times a week, always with a casserole, always steering the conversation toward simplifying things and getting your affairs in order while you're still sharp enough to make good decisions. She'd say that last part with a little smile, and I'd smile back, and inside I felt something in my chest curling up like a fist. Griffin started appearing at the house on weekday afternoons in his good suits, just passing through, carrying a leather folio that never seemed to leave his hand. He'd talk about how proud my father would be that the land was finally generating real value instead of just sitting there. I let him talk. I nodded along. I played the part of a man whose grip on his own mind was loosening 1 degree at a time, and it cost me something every single day to do it, because the man I was pretending to become was the man Renata was already telling herself I'd become. I heard her once, through the screen door, on the phone with her cousin, saying, "It's actually kind of a relief, honestly. Dad's finally slowing down. It's easier for everybody if we just handle things now instead of waiting. I want you to understand something, because I think about it every single day. It is one thing to be betrayed by a stranger. It is another thing entirely to hear your own child describe your decline as a relief." Curtis kept working. He confirmed that Griffin had already lined up a doctor, a man named Dr. Sheldon Ambrose, whose license had 2 prior malpractice settlements sealed under confidentiality, and who had apparently agreed, for a fee Curtis put at $30,000, to conduct a cognitive evaluation and produce whatever finding was needed to support a guardianship petition. The plan, as Curtis laid it out for me across my own kitchen table with the same careful patience Renata used to use explaining her math homework, was simple, and it was ugly. Griffin would file for emergency guardianship, backed by Dr. Ambrose's report. Once he had legal authority over my affairs, he would execute the $9 million sale of the North 40 to the buyer he thought was a stranger to me, pay off the men from Cleveland who didn't send letters, and quietly arrange for me to spend what remained of my sharp mind in a memory care facility 2 counties over. 1, Curtis had already confirmed Griffin had toured twice. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my back porch in the cold, looking out at the tree line my father planted, and I let myself grieve for a while, because I think grief is the only honest response to learning your child has already scheduled the end of your independent life. I grieved for the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders down to the creek, who used to fall asleep in the truck on the way home from her soccer games with her cleats still on. I grieved for the woman I thought I'd raised, someone with Ellen's stubborn decency in her, someone who'd have burned Griffin's folio in the fireplace the day she found it. And then, somewhere around 3 in the morning, the grieving turned into something colder and more useful, and I went inside and I started writing. I am not, whatever Griffin Pace believes about old men in cracked windshield pickups, a stupid man. I spent 40 years reading contracts written by people who assumed truckers couldn't read past a 3rd grade level. And I never once got taken for a fool by a piece of paper. I called my own attorney, a woman named Priscilla Okafor, who has handled Das Freight's legal work since before Renata was born and who I trust with my life, and I told her everything. Together we built a file. Bank records Curtis had pulled showing the payments to Dr. Ambrose. A recording legal in Ohio, 1-party consent. Priscilla confirmed it twice of Griffin on my own back porch, not knowing I'd left my phone recording in my jacket pocket on the rail beside him, laying out the guardianship timeline to a man from the Cleveland Lending Group over speakerphone, promising the debt would be cleared the second the old man's declared incompetent, which is going to be inside of 6 weeks, guaranteed. Then I did something Griffin never saw coming, because it never occurred to him that the stranger trying to buy my land might simply stop being a stranger. I let it be known, quietly, through my own lawyer, that the anonymous buyer's offer on the North 40 had been withdrawn. No explanation given. Just gone. I watched, over the next several days, as the fear I had been carrying around for weeks finally landed on the other side of the table. Griffin's calm cracked. I heard him yelling into his phone from his car in my driveway, thinking the windows were up far enough that I couldn't hear him through the kitchen window I'd left cracked on purpose. He was telling someone that the deal had fallen apart, that he needed another 6 weeks, maybe 8, and whoever was on the other end of that call was not interested in 6 weeks or 8. Dr. Ambrose's cognitive evaluation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in my own dining room. Renata sat beside me, holding my hand the whole time, telling me it was just a routine checkup, Dad, nothing to worry about, and I let her hold it because some small, stubborn part of me was still hoping, right up until the last possible minute, that she would stop this herself. She didn't. Doctor Ambrose asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens and to remember 3 words: apple, table, penny, and to draw the face of a clock. And I did every single thing wrong on purpose, and I watched my daughter's face as I did it. And I did not see grief on her face. I saw relief. That was the moment something in me finished breaking and finished healing, both at once. Priscilla filed the counter-motion the following Monday morning, before Griffin's guardianship petition had even been assigned a hearing date. It included Dr. Ambrose's financial records. It included the recording from my back porch. It included 2 independent cognitive evaluations I had quietly obtained myself over the previous month, both showing I was, in the words of the second doctor, functioning at a level well above baseline for his age, with no indication of any cognitive impairment whatsoever. It included Curtis Boone's full report on the Cleveland Lending Group and Griffin's $2.6 million debt to them. And it included a formal request that the court refer the entire matter to the county prosecutor's office for investigation into elder fraud, medical fraud, and conspiracy. I will remember the look on Griffin Pace's face for the rest of my life. He was standing in my driveway in one of his good suits when the process server handed him the papers, and I watched every bit of that predatory confidence drain right out of him in real time, the way water drains out of a cracked bucket. Renata came running out of the house behind him, and I watched her read 3 lines of that filing before her hand went to her mouth. I did not go to them. I stood on my own porch, on my own land, and I let them come to me. Renata crossed the yard first, and for one moment, I thought I might see my daughter again, the real one, the one who used to fall asleep with her cleats on. Instead, what came out of her was fury. She screamed that I had humiliated her, that I had set a trap for her own husband, that no father who really loved his child would have let it go this far. I let her finish. Then I told her the only thing I had left to say. I told her that a father who truly loved his child would never have had to fake his own decline just to find out whether she'd fight for him or sell him out, and that the fact I'd had to run that test at all was not my failure. It was hers. The investigation moved faster than I expected, mostly because Dr. Ambrose, facing the loss of his license and the possibility of federal wire fraud charges over the $30,000 payment, agreed to cooperate within a week. Griffin was arrested on a Tuesday morning on charges of conspiracy to commit elder fraud, attempted theft by deception, and medical fraud. Renata was charged as a co-conspirator 3 days later, after the prosecutor's office reviewed a text message she had sent Griffin the night before the evaluation, a message Curtis had already flagged in his report that read simply, "Just get it done tomorrow. I can't keep pretending to worry about him." I sat in the front row of that courtroom every single day of the trial, in a tailored suit I bought for the occasion, my hands perfectly steady, my mind perfectly clear, making absolutely certain that every single person in that room, including my daughter, understood exactly how sharp the old man in the cracked windshield pickup truly was. Griffin could not look at me once, not one single time, across 11 days of testimony. Renata looked at me exactly twice. The first time was when the state read the text message aloud in open court. The second time was when the judge handed down her sentence. The trial concluded on a gray Thursday in late October. The judge, a woman named Constance Ferry, who had clearly seen a great deal in her years on the bench and had run out of patience for excuses, called what Griffin and Renata had done a calculated betrayal of the most sacred obligation 2 people can hold, dressed up as concern. Griffin was sentenced to 11 years in a state correctional facility, with restitution ordered for the full $30,000 paid to Dr. Ambrose, plus damages. Renata, who took the stand in her own defense and wept and said she had been manipulated by her husband, was sentenced to 3 years, with the judge noting, not unkindly but not gently either, that a grown woman with a law degree does not send a text message like that one under manipulation. She sends it under agreement. I did not weep in that courtroom. I had already done my weeping, alone, on my back porch, in the cold, months before any of this reached a judge. I want to tell you what I did after, because I think it matters more than the sentencing did. I did not walk away from that courthouse and simply go back to my quiet life on my 40 acres, though God knows I was tempted to. I took $6 million of what I had, and I started a foundation in Ellen's name, one dedicated to funding independent legal representation for elderly people facing guardianship petitions filed by their own family members. People who don't have a Priscilla Okafor of their own, who don't have a Curtis Boone, who don't have $38 million sitting quietly in a trust that gives them the freedom to fight back. We call it the Ellen Doss Guardianship Defense Fund. In its first year, it has already helped 41 families keep predatory relatives out of control of an elderly parent's life. I think about that number some nights instead of thinking about Renata, because it hurts less, and because I believe, somewhere underneath everything, that it's what Ellen would have wanted me to do with what was left of this mess. I still live on the same 40 acres. I still drive the same truck, though I finally did get around to fixing that windshield. The land my father cleared with a mule team is still mine, every acre of it, and it will stay mine for as long as I draw breath, and after that it goes to the foundation, not to anyone who ever mistook my quiet life for a weak one. I don't know if Renata and I will ever speak again in any way that resembles what we once had. She writes to me sometimes from the facility where she's serving her sentence. I read the letters. I haven't answered any of them yet. I'm not certain I ever will, and I've stopped feeling guilty about that uncertainty, because I've learned something in these last 2 years that I wish someone had told me 40 years ago, back when I was pouring the foundation for that first warehouse with my own 2 hands. Love for your children is not supposed to be a blindfold. It is supposed to be a light, and a light shows you everything in the room, not just the parts that are easy to look at. I built everything I have out of nothing but stubbornness and 40 years of getting up before the sun. I am not ashamed of a single dollar I earned, and I am not ashamed of the test I ran on the 2 people who were supposed to love me for reasons that had nothing to do with any of it. What I am is clear-eyed, for maybe the first time in my life, about the difference between the people who stand beside you when you tell them you've lost everything, and the people who are only ever standing beside the money. If you've ever had to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to protect you, I want you to know you're not alone in that, and you're not wrong for choosing yourself. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to face something like this in your own family. I read every single one, and I promise you, whatever you write, I will understand it better than you might expect from an old man in a cracked windshield pickup truck who just wanted, more than anything else in this world, to be loved for exactly who he was and nothing more.